In 2012, a couple in Newman, Western Australia paid $718,000 for a 3-bedroom house. Nothing special about it, just a home near work, a backyard, a mortgage that made sense on mining wages. 5 years later, that same house was worth $238,000 and $480,000 had simply vanished. They hadn't made bad decisions or overspent or ignored the warning signs. The mine stopped needing as many workers, and that was enough to destroy them financially. Right now, in at least 10 Australian cities, that same sequence is setting up again, and this video is going to show you exactly which ones, why they're exposed, and what to watch for if you own property in any of them. 7 consecutive quarters of per capita recession. That's what the ABS has confirmed. Not forecast, confirmed. GDP per capita growth sits near zero, and household debt has reached record highs, and rent now consumes roughly a third of average Australian incomes. China, our largest trading partner, is slowing in ways that directly threaten the industries keeping several of these cities functional. A full recession isn't locked in, but the pressure is already reshaping things on the ground. Here are the 10 cities most exposed to what comes next. Mackay runs on coking coal exports, and when global commodity prices dropped between 2012 and 2017, CoreLogic data shows housing values here fell by roughly $150,000 to $200,000 across that period. Prices partially recovered after that, but the structural problem underneath never went away. Coal faces long-term contraction from China slowing its industrial output, only from energy transition policy that nobody in Canberra will say out loud is shrinking this industry, from a market that is getting smaller whether the local economy is ready for it or not. A household that bought in Mackay in 2021 carrying $550,000 in mortgage debt is now sitting on an asset tied to an industry without an obvious second act. And that gap between debt levels and industry trajectory is where the danger lives. What Mackay shows us is what happens when a boom market runs out of reasons to keep booming. But the next city shows what happens when the entire economy runs on something people only spend money on when they feel wealthy. Every dollar the Whitsundays economy generates flows through discretionary tourism, resorts, reef charters, luxury experiences that households cut the moment budgets get tight. And Tourism Research Australia recorded some of the steepest domestic visitation drops of any Australian region during 2020, and the recovery that followed ran on pandemic savings that households no longer hold. A recession doesn't need to be catastrophic to hurt this place. It just needs people to cancel the holiday. And right now, with cost of living pressure already squeezing discretionary spending, that decision is getting easier for Australian families to make. No industrial backup exists here, no diversification, and when visitor numbers fall, the local economy has nowhere to redirect itself. PropTrack data shows Hobart's median house price ran from around $350,000 in 2015 to over $700,000 at the peak, more than doubling in under a decade, driven by mainland migration, remote work demand, and genuine lifestyle appeal. The problem sitting underneath all of that was a local economy too small to support those numbers long term. Government employment, tourism and education drive Hobart's private sector, and none of those generate the kind of income that justifies $700,000 medians in a city of 240,000 people. That gap between what housing costs and what local wages actually support has been cracking open since 2022, with days on market climbing and vendor discounting returning to suburbs that ran hardest during the boom. Soften migration flows, tighten government budgets, and the foundation gets noticeably weaker. Geelong plant closed in 2016 taking thousands of jobs with it. And the city has spent the years since trying to rebuild around tech, education and healthcare. Genuine progress has been made, but Geelong competes directly with Melbourne for investment and skilled workers. And Melbourne sits 45 minutes down the freeway. When a recession contracts discretionary spending, the newer industries Geelong is counting on tend to pause their hiring cycles first. The old manufacturing base is gone. The replacement industries aren't fully embedded yet, and that window between what was lost and what's been rebuilt is where the vulnerability sits. Tourism, retail, construction, and short-term accommodation drive the Gold Coast economy, and the pandemic property boom pulled buyers in at prices that require sustained population growth and consumer confidence to hold their value. Neither of those conditions look solid right now. When discretionary spending contracts, Gold Coast hospitality and retail pull back fast, and when construction slows, the development pipeline that has been propping up local employment stalls alongside it. The city ran hard during the boom years, which means the distance between current prices and where things land in a downturn is larger than most buyers who purchased in 2021 or 2022 have accounted for. Tourism Research Australia puts the Cairns visitor to resident ratio at around 1 to 4, making it the most tourism-dependent major city in Australia. The local economy doesn't just rely on visitors. Hospitality, reef charters, international flights, accommodation. It is built almost entirely from those things, with very little underneath to catch it when they contract. COVID hit Cairns harder than almost any comparable city. Median incomes dropped, businesses closed permanently, and recovery came slowly, and only because international borders eventually reopened. Picture owning a small tourism operation there right now, carrying debt taken on in 2022 to rebuild after the pandemic, watching forward bookings soften as household budgets tighten across the country. That's not a hypothetical situation for a lot of business owners in that city. It's what's already beginning to happen. Port Hedland ships more iron ore than almost anywhere on Earth, and almost all of it goes to China. When iron ore prices fell in 2015, CoreLogic regional data shows median housing values dropped by roughly $300,000, not gradually but fast, driven by project completions and workforce reductions that remove buyers from the market almost overnight. The workforce is predominantly fly-in, fly-out, which means when mining demand drops, those workers don't slowly drift away, they leave, and housing demand collapses with them. China's steel sector is contracting, infrastructure spending there is pulling back, and Port Hedland has never built an alternative to absorb a sustained drop in iron ore demand. That buffer doesn't exist. Broken Hill has been in decline for years, and the ABS population data confirms it. Consistent year-on-year losses, young families leaving for regional centres with more economic opportunity, ageing infrastructure absorbing a shrinking tax base. And the mining that built this city has contracted to a fraction of its former scale, and the private sector never grew large enough to replace what left. A recession doesn't create Broken Hill's problem, it accelerates it. When government budgets tighten under fiscal pressure, regional transfers and funding programs that have been quietly keeping places like this functional get reduced, and there's no private investment waiting to step in. Newman is where this video started, and the numbers bear repeating. Median house prices fell from $718,000 to $238,000 between 2012 and 2017, with $480,000 stripped from the median value, not from a troubled suburb, from the median. The East Pilbara broadly tracked the same collapse, with entire streets of investment properties sitting vacant, rental yields gone, and owners unable to sell because buyers had simply stopped existing. The mines are still running, and the workforce has been rationalised and partly automated since then. which means the next downturn wouldn't need to be as severe to produce the same damage. Single industry dependency created that crash, and that structural condition hasn't changed. At the peak of the mining boom, median house prices in Karratha exceeded $800,000, and then the market collapsed. I recovered partially and now sits on foundations tied almost entirely to LNG and iron ore export volumes directed at Chinese industrial demand. That's the core exposure. 2 commodities, 1 customer, and a workforce made up largely of fly-in fly-out workers whose housing demand disappears the moment a mine employment decision gets made in a boardroom in Perth or Tokyo or Beijing. Karratha sits in a cyclone zone, adding physical infrastructure risk to economic risk. And no university, no major government employment anchor, no healthcare hub large enough to stabilise the local economy exists here. Most people look at Karratha and see a high-income mining town. What the data actually shows is a city where median prices moved by more than $400,000 in a single cycle and carry every condition needed to do it again. And 3 forces appear across every city on this list. And naming them matters because they're the same forces that showed up before every regional collapse in modern Australian history. Single industry dependency is the first one. When one sector drives everything, mining, tourism, construction, there's no buffer when that sector contracts. The whole city moves with it, up fast and down just as fast. High household debt taken on at peak prices is the second. Buyers who stretch during boom conditions are carrying mortgages that only hold up if prices don't fall. And in the most exposed cities, prices are already softening. The absence of an economic floor is the third. Cities built around hospitals, universities, government employment, and mixed industry absorb shocks because not everything contracts at once. In cities without that mix have no floor. They land wherever the commodity price or visitor number lands, and nothing cushions the drop. Early deterioration in regional markets shows up well before the data catches up, and knowing what to look for means you're not reading about the problem 12 months after it started. Hiring freezes at major employers are the first signal, not layoffs yet, just pauses in new recruitment that indicate an employer pulling back before they'll admit it publicly. Homes sitting on the market for 12 weeks instead of 4 is another one. Not crashing, just accumulating, inventory building without buyers to clear it. Small business closures in the main street follow next. And the independents go before the chains do. The cafe that has operated for 15 years. The tradie supplies shop. I'm mean businesses running on local economic confidence that feel the change before any property data captures it. Watch school enrolment figures if you can access them, because when families start leaving a regional city, enrolments drop before population data reflects it. And that's the most reliable leading indicator in regional markets that most property analysis misses entirely. A recession isn't guaranteed, and several cities on this list have absorbed downturns that looked unsurvivable before and come through them. Resilience is real, and none of this is inevitable. But here's the question worth sitting with. If the industry your city runs on contracts by 30% over the next 3 years, what does your plan actually look like? Not the government's plan, yours. If you want to keep tracking how these cities are moving, employment figures, property data, the signals that show up before the headline, subscribe, because this situation is still developing, and the next video goes deeper on the cities most people assume are protected.